Carol Morotti-Meeker. I met you at one of the Awaken Center events. Glad to be speaking to you as a guest on my radio show, Nature of Reality Radio. Welcome to the program. You are a Master of Science, Master of Law and Social Policy, Certified Reiki Master Practitioner, and have been a lifelong spiritual seeker dedicated to living from spirit for over 3 decades. Well, that's a fascinating little bit of a resume there, and there's more to that. Definitely upload it all in the video description when I upload this to YouTube. But I wanted to give you the floor now to tell your life story, what you experienced from a primary source standpoint that caused you to follow and do the things that you currently do in your present life and go on the quest that you are going on. What made you realize the spiritual and Reiki path and everything that goes with it is the path worth going, and well, all the other stuff, law, social policy. You told me yesterday it's like not really worth it. Well, why don't you get into why you figured that stuff is not really worth it, even though it looks nice on the resume. It's not worth it. You say get into why that's the case too. So you got the floor, your life story. Knock yourself out. I promise not to interrupt you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it was worth it because you've got to go to what you know and what the culture gives you before you can find out maybe this is not the way I need to go. I've always been the the swan in the duckling group. I've always been the odd one out in my family, in that I've always been interested in stuff that nobody else was interested in. I was such a bloody goody two-shoes. I was in the Girl Scouts through my high school years, and I grew up in central Illinois, and we went to Mexico City on a train. That was an excursion at 15, 16 years old. And about 30 kilometers outside of Mexico City, which is built on an island in a volcano that from long ago, there's a place called Teotihuacan, and Teotihuacan is old Mayan stuff. And here I am with a bunch of girls and a few adults walking up and down these incredible temples in this archaeological place in a green Girl Scout uniform and 1-inch heels, sweating my behind off. But the important thing is, I was standing on the Pyramid of the Sun looking down the 1.5 or so avenue, which in its heyday was filled with water and had thousands of people around doing ritual, and had deja vu, but I didn't know what deja vu was. I thought I was just imagining stuff. And then later, when I found out, did a lot of reading about what went on at Teotihuacan, it was like, OMG. I think I've been there, and who can I tell this? They'll think I'm absolutely out of my mind, and had other spiritual different experiences in my late teens and early 20s. I went to college. I got married to a nice man, and that didn't work out as a long-term thing, but he certainly was what I needed at the time, and vice versa. Got a master's in marriage and family therapy because my family of origin was such a bloody mess. And when we moved from Florida to Philadelphia area in the middle 70s, I said, now it's my turn. I've been all over the country for your profession. Now I get to do mine. Well, I looked around, and Bryn Mawr School of Social Work had a law and policy program, and I could study family law and mental health law through that, and at Villanova Law School. I mean, take a couple classes, not be a lawyer type. And I did that for 14 months, about had a nervous breakdown because all I did was use my left brain and nothing of my right brain. And you can't do too much of one side or you become very lopsided, let me tell you. What I learned from that was I didn't want to learn man-made law. I wanted to learn God's law. So I found the second of my spiritual teachers in a machine shop in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and studied with him for 7-8 years. And after he passed, started on my own journey in healing and taking reflexology courses, taking a massage course, and getting licensed for a while, studying homeopathics, especially the Bach flower remedies and other flower remedies, which are very subtle energies, which I really liked, using stones and happening upon Reiki and becoming a master practitioner. Now, what I didn't know was I was already doing energy work, because from my work with my second spiritual teacher from Delaware County, I had lots of energy coming out of my hands, but I had no idea what it was about or what to do with it. Reiki at least gave me a format of how to use it. Well, I've expanded upon that, but it was a great place to start, and I am very happy that I had that training. Basically, what I'm doing right now is three-pronged. I'm trying to help people who come to me to tap into their own spiritual voice, their own connection with God's spirit, all that is the force, give it your own name, so they can get guided internally and don't need anybody else on the outside. To do that, often we have to release and examine and then release our own fears and our own angers so that we can hear that voice very clearly. And it takes some time, it certainly did me, to be able to trust that voice. I had to go to several people and say, Carol, you're already doing it. I can tell that. And I'm going, yeah, not so much. But that absolutely is true. And you've really got to trust yourself and listen to however the small voice is inside. And it's different for different people. And you've got to respect your process to know what's the next step. Find a parking place, go looking for something you're shopping for and find the right sweater or purse or piece of jewelry or whatever it was, that it's just there. Spirit will guide you if you will allow it to give you guidance. I talk about tuning your radio channel to the whatever channel is for you. There's amplitude modification and frequency modification, AM and FM, whatever you want to use, but you've got to set the tuner to the right frequency for you to hear. And at times, over a period of time, that may slightly change. At least it has for me. I don't know if it does anybody else. Besides the counseling, I also am doing, as I said, energy work and using holistic things. The third piece of how I am finding out what the next steps are is I joke and say I'm a medieval metaphysician. I truly am, in that I have studied the humors, which are 4 different qualities that were used in medicine and other things in the Middle Ages, which can be translated to modern day stuff, but that's a whole nother talk. And Western astrology, the stuff you read in the newspaper or online or whatever, and also Chinese astrology. The two, to me, fit very well together, or complement each other, let me say that. I also, if someone comes to me, may do a numerology chart of see what energies they have in their name, what they're missing. I also do a feng shui numerology chart, which is also related back to five elements of Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. They all have their each language and form of the same thing. I've just used Chinese because it's been around longer, or at least had more publicity. So I incorporate all of these kinds of things to help people move on to their next step. Somehow or other, I have been gifted with the ability to, either through my brown bear that I keep on my bed or in person, my hands go over their body or the bear's representation of it, find where the blocks parts are, and help to heal or repair the energy that is not working well at that spot. There are energy grids in our body. That's what Chinese medicine is about. There are 12 main grids and lots of other ones that go around us, but and they get broken, they get blocked, and that's once you open them up or repair them, health comes back. Let me give you an example of the next thing I'm going to say. Even if someone helps you physically do some healing, unless you change the belief systems and the attitudes and the way of looking at life in your world, in your mind, you will go back to the state of blockage and dis-ease. I learned that in the 1990s when I went to a famous Native American healer, and I put out $100, which was a lot of money for me that time. And by darned, the problem went away for a few weeks. But of course, I didn't realize at that time you have to change how you look at things, your belief system, what that's associated with. So part of my work in counseling and coaching is leading people to find out what their body and is telling them. In my view, all physical and emotional dis-ease has to do with a spiritual, emotional, psychological issue that has not been dealt with and or resolved. I'm perfectly willing to let you have your own interpretation of that, but that's what makes sense to me. That's my experience. In using the metaphysical and astrological things, I know that life is cycles, big cycles and little cycles. We have a monthly cycle. We go through calendar months. Women have monthly cycles. We go through yearly cycles. We go through school, which is a cycle of about 12 years, 12, 13 years for kindergarten, elementary school, and high school kind of thing. All of those are related to planetary energies. And when you were born, you have a map of what you're supposed to be doing to actualize and be happy and do your work in this lifetime in that chart. And the wisdom is to know how to read it and to live it. And sometimes it's easier than others, and sometimes there's a whole lot of blockages and the timing just isn't right. You can be ahead of your time, and people will say this is not right, and then 5-10 years later it's all the rage. Those are the basic tools of how I work with folks, and have gotten some really nice results. First, I always practice on me. I frame what I do as being a way shower. Here's the forest. You want to go through the forest to your own destination. I'm not sure what your destination is, but I can show you how to go through the forest so you don't lose your way, and lead you a ways down the path until we need to part company, and you've done your, and you know the skills to how to do it for yourself. How does this sound? This make sense?
Of course, because I've been talking about this kind of stuff and seeing people like you at places like the Awaken Center for a long time. So, to the left-brained person who's lost in a sheeple-like trance, it's not really going to be understood. But to me and people like you, it makes perfect sense. So,
A lot of
what?
people are waking up. There's been so much stuff going on in the world, and especially in the last 10, 12 years, that people are questioning their what they had from their childhood, from their culture, from their families, from their group, and looking at quote unquote new age and spiritual things in a different way. And I say that's the beauty and and some of the silver lining of all of the garbage we're going through right now on so many levels.
Yes, and the people that refuse to want to wake up, well, hopefully things will happen that will actually inspire them to realize that waking up is kind of in their best interest because they have no choice but to believe in what they refuse to believe for a long time. I kind of say that because I had this interesting experience happen to me this past week where I had bought something. I'm not going to say what it was, but it was kind of controversial. It was supposed to be a cheaper version of something that I had been buying locally, but something that I bought from China off Alibaba.com was supposed to be significantly cheaper. My housemaid and parents were very, very skeptical about this, and I just so happened that the bag of the stuff that I bought off Alibaba.com from China mysteriously disappeared from the place that I was planning to keep it the whole entire time. So naturally, I have three suspects, well, actually four suspects: the housemaid, my parents, and possibly higher level spiritual entities of a higher level of consciousness that I know exist, well, because I've interviewed people like you, and also because when I had other possessions of mine disappear, I called the person who I bought the stuff from, the metaphysical salesman. His wife was a psychic medium. He put her on the phone. She was trying to understand what was happening to the things that were disappearing, and she told me that my paternal grandfather on the other side was talking with her and telling her that my angels and guides were taking the things, not only as a way of showing that they're there for me, but also as a way of showing that the things I was buying, like chips to protect me from EMF energies and all, I don't really need to waste my money on them, they say, because they're going to protect me from those things and do the work of those things. Reassuring thing and all, but now because they did that, I have reason to believe, okay, maybe they could have taken the thing from me. Possibly the thing wasn't all that good as I thought it was, so they were trying to protect me and all. And, well, that's what my parents and my housemaid were assuring me. They said, we did not take it from you, Andrew. We assure you we didn't. And I have reason to believe, based on their body language and all, and also a couple pendulum readings that I did to see if they were in the clear, that they are innocent, and it must have been the angels and guides. But I told my parents, well, if there is actually a bright side to this that I should actually be happy about them taking that thing from me, it's the fact that now you guys who refuse to believe that these higher level things, which your own father, dad, my paternal grandfather told me exist, now you have no choice but to believe these things exist because by process of elimination, they're the only entities that could have taken the thing from me if you guys truly are innocent. And that kind of left my parents speechless, and also the housemaid a little speechless too. I mean, she seems a little more open-minded than my parents do, but the reason they were speechless is because they were like, it looks like Andrew's right after all. We guess we have no choice but to believe there are these higher level entities. They may be kleptocratic for whatever the reason, but they do
They're
exist. They must
protecting
exist
you
because
from
there's,
yourself. Be grateful.
yes. And
And
I hope
as
these things,
far as
yeah.
skipping a generation, that happened in my family. I was born 4 days and 60 years after my maternal grandmother, and she and I were tighter than ticks. It was like my mother was just a conduit for me to be here. I learned a whole lot from her. Um, anyway, this is an example, the generation of cycles, and 60 years is a cycle in Chinese of all of the pattern of like wood horse year or whatever it is coming around and repeating itself. So, and 60 breaks down, since there are 5 elements, 60 breaks down into 5 12-year cycles. And our the planet in our solar system that has to do with expansion and let the good times roll, Jupiter, happens to have a 12-year cycle. In many faiths, at 12 or 13 years old, a young person is given formal instruction and brought into the faith through ceremony and teachings and having to pass exams or whatever they have to do in that particular faith. It's also about the time that children are able to do abstract thinking, and even in their brain are then wired up for things that don't have mass and aren't in physical reality, like spirit and philosophy and that kind of thing. So the ancients knew a whole lot about how the body works and how people work. And do you know how we got to have 21 to be our age of majority?
Well, actually, some cultures would beg to differ on that
Well,
one,
okay,
but
but I
assuming it's
mean
our culture, I'm
legally.
not exactly sure where that actually comes from.
But I will tell you, it
Okay.
is 3/4 of Saturn's cycle. Saturn is the planet that has to do with limits and government and requirements and bosses and the container, the structure, the form. In the Middle Ages, at 7 years old, young men went off to either a boarding school or were put out to a tradesman to learn that trade. At 14, they were journeymen, apprentices. They had learned enough that they could do a lot on their own, even though they weren't masters. At 21, they were considered masters. Now, this is in the days when a long life was 35 or 40. So you had to get in there. You had to learn how to bring money or trade in and procreate early, because you weren't going to be around that long. 28, 29 years is how long it takes Saturn to go around the sun. And in my experience, certainly personally and with lots and lots of clients, between 28 and 30, people usually go through a big life change if they're not on doing what they need to. They get married, they get divorced, they change locations, they get into a new job, they drop out, they have a baby, they just some life-changing thing goes on at that time. For me, I finished second graduate school and went on a 6-7 month spiritual journey, and then came back to my husband and said, as soon as I find a job and get an apartment, I'm moving out. I just don't see us being able to stay together. And he was devastated, and it hurt me too. But you can grow past somebody, and it all worked out for the best. But in the meantime, those shifts can be pretty tough and emotionally wrenching for everybody, even when you know it's the right thing to do. That's where you need support of friends who are just going to be there for you. They don't, not to tell you what to do, but to listen and be there while you go through your transformation or your dark night of the soul. That's a real friend. And that's where you can call on spirit. Spirit will be there even though it may not look like it. Tell you a story. A friend of mine many years ago was in a job she didn't like, and she was in retail, and she said, as soon as I get 50 wheat pennies, I am leaving this job. A wheat penny is a penny that has the 2 boughs of olive branches on the back of it. They're very rare nowadays, but they were quite common in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it only took her like 2 weeks or something to get this. And that was extraordinary. Nobody else knew about it. And all of a sudden she just said, I quit, and walked out. And it was the best thing that ever happened, because she was able to then get into something that was much more agreeable for her. We all have signs along the way. Parking spaces are one of my favorite things. That's one of the first things my teacher taught me is, you're going someplace, you need to park. Where you're going to park on the street for not much money, and usually could conjure up a parking spot. One would just become available, or I would see when I was coming down the street. That's putting out your intention and watching for the signs along the way. Also, we really do have angels and masters and people who have passed over that have been important to us, who are looking out for us. That really is true. And I've worked, my first spiritual teacher way back in Florida in the early 70s said, you work your angels pretty hard. You really push the limits. And I go, oh, really? I didn't even believe in this stuff. But he helped me. He was finishing his doctorate in social work at Florida State, and he needed a female to help him with some very difficult therapy clients. Sometimes a guy who's going through stuff needs a woman to bounce off of, but not like a partner or date kind of woman, someone who can really feed back to him what he's doing and not doing, that is working to not have people upset with him and get what he wants. Anyway, my first teacher said he had gotten in an adult learning course in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he got his master's in social work. 5 books that the teacher said, read these and this will change your life. Well, I forgot 3 of them, but the 2 I remembered were Thomas Mann, Death in Venice, which is a short story, and then Joseph Campbell's A Hero with 1,000 Faces. That book kept me sane for 4 years. The only problem with it was about how men do the spiritual journey, the different parts of them in myth, through all different cultures and through the ages. It wasn't how a woman does it. I'm going, oh boy, I'm in big trouble now. And finally, I sussed out a couple women who were Sufis who had done this, but that was tough. Anyway, it's a lot easier now. People have published all kinds of stuff all over the place. You guys have it so easy. I'm kidding. Having children, and especially for a woman, definitely makes your journey a little bit more interesting, because you have not just a responsibility to yourself, you have a responsibility to raise and teach this child and keep them fed and clothed and schooled and whatever else we do with children these days. So that makes it, and still stick with your spiritual practice. That is really quite an undertaking. And guys it's the hero's journey, and it's the journey inside. You don't have to go anyplace physically. It's the journey inside into your own realms and fighting your own demons. There are all kinds of stories about that, like The Witch in the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. That's a coming of age type story. That's something people may have read. All 3 Tolkien books are the same thing also. They were written in the Depression, which are reflected in the darkness of those books. My teacher had around to illustrate for me 2 things you would never think of, probably. Alice in Wonderland and Pinocchio. Each of those, I'm half Italian. Pinocchio means little mischief maker in Italian. And but Alice in Wonderland absolutely is a as is The Wizard of Oz, a hero's journey for Dorothy, kind of thing. It's also a political commentary and a financial commentary, but mostly it's just a neat story with interesting characters and the silver and gold, and originally the slippers were silver, but for the movie they made them red for Technicolor TV. And I've researched many stories and see how different myths and stories are part of the hero's journey of individuation. It's one of the things I've really focused upon. I love Carl Jung for his archetypal and spiritual perspectives, not necessarily for his anti-Semitic and German-leaning in World War II thoughts.
Thank you. And I'd like to get into briefly some of the stuff that you said you don't really consider important, but I think maybe in a sense it is important in this day and age because it's carries a lot of weight in understanding natural law versus what is man-made. And you have a Master of Law and Social Policy, and law and social policy.
In mental health and family law, yeah.
Yes. And, well, when it comes to law, what is law? There really is no definition for the term anywhere in any other than a standard English dictionary. And when it comes to social policy, there seems to be two major schools of thought from the Enlightenment. The one was the Thomas Hobbes one, that government needs to exist to control society because people by nature cannot be trusted. Therefore, people need to make social contracts, have to be forced to make social contracts to give up certain rights for the well-being of society.
Right.
And government exists to keep society in check. But of course, there's the John Locke philosophy that says that Hobbes totally violates common sense with that belief, because the collective authority of a group can't exceed the authority of any individual member of that group. Consequently, if we in the general public do not as individuals have authority to order or force someone to give up their right to do anything as long as they don't do harm or intend to cause harm through negligence or deliberate intent, and we don't have authority to punish people for exercising such rights, then the government obviously cannot have authority to do the same. Well, we have all kinds of laws that punish people for doing no harm. Can you say drug laws and all the rest of them like that? Well, yeah, we do, and they're not supposed to exist. But you have all these brainwashed people who feel that we need to have the government control our lives or else society is going to fall apart. Well, as someone who has a degree in social policy, can you maybe help make sense of why people insist on having that statist mentality of I want to be a slave because society will fall apart if people don't want to be slaves?
Because as Thomas Jefferson and a few of the other founders of this country said, you have to trust the populace. You have to trust the people. But when they were talking about the people in the 1700s, they were talking about white men, mostly who owned property. But the idea is they were of the Enlightenment. They were offshoots of the Enlightenment from the 16 and 1700s that was happening in Europe. Remember, kings were around in Western Europe and other places, so because the people obviously don't know what's best for them. Well, the United States was the grand experiment that the people were going to choose their own leaders and let them lead them down wherever they needed to go. Now, sometimes that's worked and sometimes that hasn't, but at least the root of our Constitution is we the people. And when folks get scared, like they did in the late 20s and early 30s, when fascism was on the rise, when things are uncertain, they want a good daddy to come along and say, oh, if you do it my way, everything is going to be fine, and put lots of restrictions on. We're in that kind of environment again right now. And I don't want to get technical, but there are some astrological similarities between that time and this time. That's another discussion also. But if there's any upside to all of the natural catastrophes we're having with the fires and the floods and the hurricanes and the whatever else is going on, when these things have subsided from their roar, people come together and help each other and do for each other. And there's a sense of community and camaraderie that I think sometimes the politics has ripped us asunder, to use a phrase. So in that way, and Mother Nature is saying, you can't keep violating me, I'm going to strike back. Mother Gaia has her own needs and needs to be respected, like all of the protests and demonstrations around the world by students and other people that have been going on today, which I completely support. So when people get scared and don't know what to do, and there's a lot of uncertainty, they want someone to say, I'll handle it for you. But doing that has them give up some of their freedoms and some of their own self-determination, when if we as sentient beings, including the animals, the plants, the insects, and everybody else, tunes into their own spiritual nature and does what they're about, what they're here to do, how they're to be of service to humankind and the earth and the planet, we wouldn't have to do with all that. It's fear. As Louise Hay said in her book from many years ago, physical disease comes from either fear or anger, and holding on to anger will kill you. I saw that happen personally with my mother, who was angry at all kinds of supposed injustices by me and lots of other people, and it just isn't worth it. Personally, I was angry with male people for a long time because I felt male people in my life had not treated me well or loved me the way I really wanted to be loved. And the fallacy with that was, I was a kid. They were doing the best that they could. I didn't tell them exactly what I needed and wanted, and I'm responsible for loving me and letting other people know what I need and what I want, and if they're willing and capable of giving, fine, and if not, that's okay too. It's my personal responsibility. But as soon as I truly let go of that anger toward guys and rah, 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 y'all are just users and whatever, the most wonderful man came in my life, and we've been dating for almost a year now. Next week, it'll be a year that we've been going out. So, and that's true for either gender, any gender orientation. Let go of your preconceived fears and angers. People are just people doing the best that they can, and you're going to find a good fit when you're as clean a slate as you can possibly be. You'll be able to pick something out. People will be able to pick you out. Not trying to put people in any kind of boxes for gender orientation or relationship style or anything like that. It all works itself out, and we have to allow people to find their own level. And as a teacher in the school that I work in said today, in my teens, I was one way. In my early 20s, I was another. In my late 20s, I did another thing. And now I'm in my early 30s and have given up most of that. But I'm glad I went through it. That's called stages of becoming. And we need to allow those to happen for ourselves and others. That's part of what the problem is in relationship. I'm talking about close personal relationship, as well as our coworkers and who we live next door to or across the street from. Allow people to be what they are and communicate in a way that that person can receive what you're trying to communicate, and be open to what other people are communicating and ask for clarification in a loving, compassionate way, not in an irritated way. And heaven knows I've done plenty of both. I do as I do, not do as I say, not as I do, but every day I have to keep myself focused and be from spirit as much as I possibly can, because my ego gets in the way. Ego is fine. What Ram Dass said many years ago, you've got to have enough ego to get on the bus. Ego is not bad. It just needs to be in service to spirit and not the other way around, because otherwise it's the tail wagging the dog. How say you, Andrew?
Oh, couldn't agree more. And I'd like to get into for a moment about the Reiki that you do, because that seems to be your specialty. I can't remember if you've actually mentioned this earlier specifically, but Usui, if I pronounce that correctly, Reiki,
Yes.
that's the tradition that you do. How does that differentiate? Can you compare and contrast that with other forms of Reiki, and why choose that one?
I really have not investigated other forms of Reiki. I know that was the first one that was brought to the United States by a lady in Hawaii at the close of World War II, and it was told to be Christian when in reality it's Buddhist. But at that time, right after World War II, United States people couldn't have heard that because of the politics of what had just gone on. I've learned about energy work in different styles and modalities, and I just incorporated a lot of different things into what I do. I don't know if I'd even call it anything in particular. I can sit with this bear that I use as a surrogate and do diagnosing and do energy treatment for something, and I don't know what the heck you call it, and I don't really care. Either you're getting some results and people are feeling something if they're open to it. If people say they want to get healed, but they're getting, for example, money because of disability, because of that particular problem that they have, then they're kind of fighting themselves. They don't want to give up the support that they're getting, but they want to give up the disability. That's the kind of time when people have to get real with themselves of what's more important. And if you are quote unquote healed and come back to healthy, normal, or homeostasis is a better way to put that, what's your next step? And I know for myself in my life, there have been times when I've kept myself trapped because I was afraid of the next step. I'm definitely getting past that now. And we all have cycles when, man, everything seems really dark and I don't know what to do, and this just isn't making any sense. And as the Chinese say, crisis and confusion is the beginning of wisdom. Just sit with it, be with it. And especially if you use some whatever kind of meditation or mind clearing so that spirit can come in and give you what it needs, what you need at that time, and prayer, asking for guidance and meaning it, it'll appear even in the strangest ways. Be just very vigilant about what comes your way and who comes your way and what they bring. That's happened over and over to me. Usui is the first one, and there are lots of other very legitimate and very useful ways to do energy work. Whatever you're drawn to is what you can learn and use. It's just like a multifaceted crystal. All of these things, alchemy, astrology, numerology, whatever, are all facets of the same crystal. It's just which way do you want to go in to get to source. It really almost doesn't matter. It's like, what flavor of ice cream do you like? You're going to get the good, sweet, sticky goodness. You're going to get what Spirit is trying to tell you, no matter what way you go in, if you are clear in intent and have an open heart and are truly a seeker.
That's very good advice there. And also, you says here you assist people adhere themselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Well, the thing that's key there is heal themselves, like Wolverine from the X-Men. Heal yourself,
Right,
and heal quickly.
exactly.
And
And that things like in the popular culture, like X-Men, are even saying the same thing. Who'd have thunk it? Fabulous. Who'd have thunk it? That's fantastic. And it's a reflection of the times.
yeah, well, you say you really can't heal yourself as quickly and also have an enjoyable life if you're angry. Boy, this is something I've said on my show that sound like a broken record, drives the listeners crazy, I'm sure, but I got to say it again because, well, I'm not the only one in this boat. People who actually like being angry because being mad, they enjoy that feeling of like getting an iceberg off you and building up all your anger to get that iceberg off you. That feeling of anger can come in very handy, they assert, when you're trying to overpower evil forces that will slaughter innocent people at the drop of a hat to have their way. You need to you fight fire with fire sometimes. And when I say like being mad, I say that in the Alex Jones of Infowars style of liking being
Okay.
mad. And that's do you agree or disagree with that
Well,
that
I go
attitude?
back to uh, um, the first teacher I had of martial arts who had been in the South Korean army, and man, he worked me like a dog. I didn't know anything, but I knew he told me when he was born, and would I knew enough Chinese astrology. He was, even though he was from Korea, to give him what he was about, and I'm sure he knew more about it than I do. But like the samurai, you know how to do poetry, you know how to write, you know how to dance, and also you know how to fight when you need to, but you also learn diplomacy and how to avoid that if at all possible. I mean, I stayed in martial arts long enough to feel confident that I know some moves if somebody's physically trying to take advantage of me, as long as they don't have a gun to my head. um, I feel fairly confident, and using their own energy that they're putting out against them or neutralizing it is in a way that hurts them and doesn't hurt you, that you can either get away or say, can we talk about this, rather than you trying to strong arm me because this isn't going to work. um, and there's verbal and emotional warfare as well as physical, but war is not, it's when everything else is broken down. um, it's not necessarily the way people, there is no I and thou. I mean, there is no us and them. There's only us. And there's plenty on planet Earth of what everybody needs for everybody, if we will just learn how to share and look at the larger picture. That goes for about anything.
Right, and that also raises a question about the best way to go about doing this in regards to focusing on inner work and also the big picture, looking at the world. I mean, they always say change yourself for the better, and the world you see will be a reflection of the good person that you have changed yourself into. But when you realize that everything in this world is a reflection of your consciousness, then you can't help but wonder, okay, when do I stop worrying about myself and just go out there into the world to look for a problem that I know I have the ability to solve, when is doing that perfectly acceptable and maybe even in some cases better than trying to focus on inner work. And I mean, some would say, well, it's never a good idea to go looking for trouble. Well, no, if your intention is to fix the problems of the world because you feel we're only as strong as our weakest link, there's a lot of exceptions to that expression, I'm sure, but you get the idea. Then when is it a bad idea to go looking for trouble in the world to try to fix? You can't change the world, but at least you can.
Yes, you
do
can,
something to,
but you can only do it maybe one person or one group or one child or one man or woman at a time. Hurt people, people who are hurt inside hurt other people one way or another. And if you can be a voice of calm and support and acceptance for the hurt, and model how to work through that. I've worked with homeless folks. I've worked with drug and alcohol people who were desperately looking for something to make the emotional pain go away. But first they covered it up with a whole bunch of other stuff, and then they had to deal with the original stuff. And those are the people who often are doing violence in one way or another in the world. Take the time to reach out and in some way, directly or indirectly, talk to those folks. I work with, on a daily basis, I work in a school with kids who have behavioral and emotional problems. And believe me, it's a challenge. I wish I could have some time with the parents first. I would work myself out of a job, which is okay. I'm happy to work myself out of a job. There are always more kids. But you will find, if you're looking for a teacher, that you will find the right teacher for you at that time. If you're looking for a cause or something to do in the world, what gifts, what talents do I have that someone else could use and benefit from, and go give them out freely, either for money exchange or whatever else. But believe me, you'll feel good. Like right now, I'm trying to clean out my closets of all the stuff I don't wear and haven't worn for years. I'm going to give that to the bags of it to the local mental health hospital, where people come in have real serious mental health issues and or drug and alcohol issues, and they don't have much. They don't have warm coats, they don't have pants or tops or anything to put on to keep them or to start another life. And I know that my stuff would be serviceable and would help them on their way. That's just a very small thing. My teacher said, if you feel like you can't do something, go find a man that doesn't have any feet or can't walk and help him get through the world.
Yes, and I guess time for one more question, then we'll call it a night. But this whole
Sure.
thing about going into like fixing yourself and also to try to change the world, but also going out to do things that change the world. Let's take the recent.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you. I wanted to quote one of our master spiritual thinkers, Frank Sinatra. Doobie doobie do. Be, examine, then go out and do. See what comes back to you. What do you learn from the doing? Then take time to be quiet with yourself and how did I feel about that? What came at me? What do I need to change? What did I do well? What did I do not so well? How can I be better? These kinds of things. Doobie doobie do. Very simple. It's all relatively simple once you take all the extraneous stuff off. Life is pretty simple. We make it complicated.
Yes, and on that note, the recent thing I wanted to mention about the recent craze that turned out to eventually be for nothing, but there's a lot of videos out there at the moment that are going live on the internet to try to see if anything did actually happen. The whole Storm Area 51 thing. Now, one could say, okay, you want all the secrets at Area 51 to be exposed. How can you as an individual do that? Well, two schools of thought. One, the guy Cobra, who he goes by the alias Cobra, always has his voice blocked out, garbled whenever he's out in some interview. He has said one of the best ways for individuals to try to change reality is to actually envision something happening. He says, envision the powers that be getting arrested, envision Area 51 technologies being exposed. Okay, but would that actually be as effective as getting a million-man March stampede to storm Area 51 in one sitting, knowing that they can't murder us all if we're well over a million strong storming the same place? And well, okay, which is the better way to try to change the world? The latter
Okay,
way,
the,
or
the the secrets of the UFOs, the aliens, whatever you want to call it, are beginning to come out now. The U.S. government and other governments around the world have had them for years and years and years, and they're starting to come out. If you haven't heard that in the news, that really is true. The more pressure we put on, the more clamor we have, and if going to Area 51 out in the desert is what floats your boat, God bless, go for it. But it's possible to see things from other parts of the universe by just going out in a field on the right kind of time. Timing is everything. And a group of you having enough, an assembly of people having a one intention will call them and they will come. So there's somebody called Dr. Stephen Greer who has done a whole lot of work on this, and he's having a film come out in December, so says a friend of mine who's deeper into this than I am. And I plan to go see it and see what's going on. Storming the barricades like the French did in Les Mis is one way to do it, but I come from the school of I'd rather leverage them to reveal it on their own because they think it's a good idea.
fair enough, that's your decision. And
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that's the only way to go. Absolutely.
Yes, Stephen Greer, fascinating guy. I love his work, although it did really, I must say, piss me off when I reached out from come my show, and the response I got was, "Your show doesn't have a big enough audience for someone like Stephen Greer to come on." Oh, give me a break! All the people are doing at the little guys trying to fix the world, and you're telling me that you think Stephen Greer is too fascinating an individual to be worthy of coming on my show, which only has about 5,500 YouTube subscribers. That we can't have that kind of stuff in this world. Not only do we need to have people like you at the local level coming on shows with local radio hosts like me who aren't so popular and don't have big audiences because we do 2-hour shows and people have lousy attention spans. Yeah, I need to make a stink about that. But we need people with big names being willing to come on shows like this, like Rex Bear, who does the Leak Project out of Grandma's Garage. Not that long ago, he got David Icke on his program, and many people found that incredible. Well, would David Icke actually say, well, I'm too sophisticated a truth individual to come on a show like yours? Well, I hope he doesn't, and I hope someday that changes. It'll be nice to get him on and a few other public figures with big names, because that could certainly, like it or not, increase my audience size. But then again, we can't have people saying I can't come on your show because I'm too popular to come on a show of your low status, and that's very hurtful. And well,
they've got too big an ego. That's unfortunate. Planting small seeds in a lot of different places, like who mythically, I mean, he was a real person. Johnny Appleseed did plants, makes a lot of things grow. So I'm much for going, and I've done talks on many different things in lots of small venues and I know even if I moved one person's mind to do something different than they did, that was a success. It doesn't take it only, like Margaret Mead said 80 years ago, it only takes a very small group of people to make a big change in the world. And we're it. It's happening right now. We are part of it, whether we can see it or not. And so are you, Andrew. And thank you for what you're doing.
And thank you for what you're doing and being a guest on my show. So, all right, it's been an hour. I guess we'll call it a night now. I'm sure I'll see you at some local event. And again, if it's not too much trouble, could you please try to, as soon as possible, send me a picture of yourself so I can upload this this interview to a compatible format with a banner with your my show banner and your picture
Nope.
on it. I want to try to get that as soon as possible. All right,
Will
take
do.
care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Namaste, and enjoy the upcoming fall season and
I
whatever the
am.
future holds for us.
Happy fall equinox early Monday morning. God bless.
Bye.
Take